So the purpose of this video is to demonstrate how to calculate ESP indicators that have to do with student status, such as gross enrollment, net enrollment, withdrawals, etc.
So in order to calculate student performance from data downloaded from OpenEMIS, we have to apply a couple of Excel functions. And these include the table formatting function, the use of pivot tables, manipulating data, specifically importing data from outside of Excel, and specifically OpenEMIS, importing OpenEMIS data into Excel, and the use of Excel formulas to calculate rates. So if you go to the Ministry's SharePoint site, you should see a number of subsites at the landing page when you log in, and the information, the videos that are associated with the Excel functions that we're going to be using to calculate gross enrollment rates, for example, is in this site called Capacity Building. And at the top, the main menu is an OTJ training video library. If you click on that, you will see a document library or a video library with all of the introductory videos on the specific Excel functions that we're going to be using in this video. So these are the steps required for the calculation of the gross enrollment rate. You have to download the status of students from OpenEMIS Integrator. You have to import the data into Excel. You have to format the data as a table. You create a pivot table of all of the student information you download from OpenEMIS. And then you create a pivot table of age groups, because you're going to need those two things to calculate a gross enrollment rate.
So the first thing that has to be done is to download a cube from OpenEMIS Integrator that contains all student status information. So these are all of the data cubes that are contained in OpenEMIS Integrator, and we have created a specific cube that contains all of student status. And to be able to go there, what you do is you type in the search box RFS and search for all of the cubes with text in their names containing RFS. And if you press on the search key, you'll see all of the cubes that were developed by us. And if you go down to this particular cube, RFS student status, that is the data cube that contains all of the student status in OpenEMIS. Just a reminder that these are student statuses because these are student statuses in OpenEMIS, we're only talking about public schools. So we're just going to review what is actually in that student status data cube. So to do that, one goes to the select button, click, and select view. Now we're just going to preview what the data looks like. So one can do that by clicking on the data tab. And you can see by the number of records that this is student statuses across all of the years that OpenEMIS is being used to record student statuses. So the key bit of information here, obviously here is the student status code. Another key bit of information is the education grade code. Other key bits of information have to do with the academic period and year, as well as the start year. So these are key information that's required to calculate enrollment rates. So another important field that has to be included in the data cube is the student date of birth. This is because some of the indicators that have to do with education, such as gross enrollment, requires calculation of the specific official age groups for enrollment in specific grades. So now that we have all of the required fields, we're going to be using Excel to calculate these fields, to calculate the enrollment rates. And so one would, to do that, one would go to the Export tab and the Export button here. And then one goes up to the download icon button here to download the data cube. So now I am in a blank Excel worksheet, and what we're going to do is we're going to import the data cube, which we downloaded from OpenEMIS and saved to a local file, saved to your computer, and bring it into this Excel spreadsheet for analysis and calculation of the education indicator. If you've noticed from the previous clip, the data cube was downloaded as a CSV file onto the local computer. So what we're going to do is we're going to import that into Excel. So to do that, one goes to the data menu item at the top, selects from text to CSV to import data. And now you're going to need to find the CSV file, the downloaded file from OpenEMIS. And in this case, I put it in the download section of my computer. And you can see right here that this is the the data that was downloaded from OpenEMIS. So you select, and then you press import. So and then what happens is Excel shows you a little bit of a preview of your data, so you can see that these are all columns that were familiar to you. These are all of the columns that saw during the data preview in OpenEMIS Integrator. And so if everything looks okay, then all you have to do is press load. And then it loads all of the data into an Excel spreadsheet.
So as mentioned earlier, there are a number of education statistics that requires calculation of the age of the student at the school year. There are in the data cube downloaded from OpenEMIS several bits of information that one can use to calculate the age of the student for any given school year. So there, for example, there's a column that contains information on the date of birth of the student, and there's also a column that shows the end date for that student for a particular school year. But there's also a start date as well for the student for that particular school year. So what that means is there are many ways of calculating age. One can calculate age from the date of birth of the student until the start date of any given school year, or the end date for any given school year. So in this particular example, we're going to calculate the age of the student at the end of the school year. And so what we have to do, therefore, is insert a column that will contain a calculation of the age of the student, taking into account that student's date of birth and the end date for any particular school year. So there is a Microsoft Excel function called dateDiff, which will calculate the age of the student at any particular school year. And this is it right here. And it takes 3 bits of information. The first thing that it's going to take is the date of birth of the student, as you can see right here. The next bit of information it's going to need is the end date of the school year. And there's a little other piece of information here that it's a Y, which just tells the function to return the number of years. So you enter that into the field as a calculated field, as a function, and you just press return. Or maybe you just press on the check button here, and as you can see, it calculates the age of the student. So for this particular student, was born in 2010, and at the end of the school year for 2018, that student was 7 years old. So before moving on to the other stages of the calculation, it's probably a good idea to show what the end product is for at least one of the education indicators. In this example, we're going to be choosing the gross enrollment ratio. So the definition of a gross enrollment ratio is total enrollment in a specific level of education, regardless of age, expressed as a percentage of the eligible school-age population corresponding to the same level of education in a given school. So what is required in terms of the calculation is you divide the number of pupils or students enrolled in a given level of education, regardless of age, by the population of the age group which officially corresponds to the given level of education, and multiply the result by 100. So, well, we have the total number of students per grade and level, that is primary and secondary. What we haven't discussed is the denominator for this particular statistic, which is the number of the proportion of the TCI population that is of eligible school age for each level. And this is what these two tables represent. This table has to do with the distribution of the official age of admission for secondary school, which ranges from 10 years old to 16. And this represents the official age of admission for primary, which spans 8 to 13. These numbers were essentially taken from another data source, which we will be showing you presently. So before going on to the specifics of the calculation, just wanted to repeat right here that in this particular case, when calculating gross enrollment, it doesn't really matter that one has to calculate the age of the student at that particular year because of how the gross enrollment is calculated. What does matter is finding out the numbers for the total population in TCI for the official age of admission for primary and secondary. All right, we're now proceeding to the next part of the calculation where we have to turn this table in this data set into a pivot table. But before we do that, we're going to have to do a little bit of a technical manipulation for the student age. Now, if you look at student age, you can see that it's a formula. We have to turn that into a number. So the first thing that one has to do is you have to select all of the values in the range. So once you select the values in the range, you right click and choose copy, and then you right click again and you choose this icon, which is you turn the formula into actual numbers. So as you can see from here, there are no longer formulas in the cells. They're actual numbers. So before we actually get into calculating gross enrollment, I'd like to do a bit of let's call it data validation. So what we're going to do right now is count the number of records in the data set by school. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just display a complete list of school names. So that is contained in this field called institution names, as you can see. So we're going to select that and we're going to drag it over to the rows part of the pivot table. So now you see that what is displayed are the names of all of the schools in OpenEMIS. As you can also see, it's a mixture of both it's a mixture of secondary schools and primary schools. But what we'd like to do is focus on secondary schools. Where I'm going to show you how to do that. As an aside, in Integrator, it was not clear if there was a direct way to filter out secondary schools from primary schools. So I'm going to show you a way of doing it that is a bit more indirect by filtering out the grades for secondary schools. That information is contained in the field called education grade code. grades code, and I'm going to drag that over to the filters part. And I'm going to select this drop-down list. So as you can see, all grades are selected, and what we want to do is you want to just filter for grades only relevant to secondary. So we're going to uncheck all. We're going to make sure that select multiple items is checked, and we're going to select only the grades related to secondary. So advanced year 2, form 1, form 2, form 3, form 4, and form 5. Press OK. And now you can see that only secondary schools are selected. So now what we want to do is we want to see how many records in the database, in the data cube, there are for each of these schools. And how you do that is you scroll up to the ID section, the ID column, and you drag the ID over to the values section of the pivot table, and you select count. And what you see here is a count, the number of records in the data set having to do with each of the secondary schools. Now we need another filter, which is, let's say we want to calculate a baseline. The baseline for the ESP is 2018. So we'd like to filter out every record in the cube except for 2018, the school year 2018. So you do this by selecting the column name called academic periods end year, and you drag that to the filter section, and you click on the drop-down list and you deselect all. You make sure that the select multiple items is checked, and you select 2018. So on the left-hand side is the pivot table of the screen. The left-hand side of the screen is the pivot table. And the total for 2018 secondary schools, according to the data cube downloaded from OpenEMIS, is 1,796. So on the right-hand side is the worksheet used to calculate the Education Digest for 2018. And you can see here I have selected the total enrollment for the same schools as one can see on the left-hand side, which is the pivot table from the data cube downloaded from OpenEMIS. So if you select the numbers on the right-hand side that's coming from the worksheet used to calculate the Education Digest for 2018, and if you look at this number here, the sum total of enrollments for those secondary schools selected in 2018 is 1,795, and that pretty much matches up with the sum total of enrollments for the same secondary schools from the OpenEMIS data cube. So another reason for conducting this data validation is to prove that using this pivot table approach yields the exact same statistics as whatever was used to generate education statistics for the Education Digest for 2018. So after doing the data validation, let's now return to the details of calculating gross enrollment. So you will recall that part of the calculation of gross enrollment has to do with finding out how many children in the TCI population are within the official ages of enrollment for primary and secondary. So what you see in front of you is data about the age distribution of the population by sex. So in one column you have the age, and then you have the age divided up by male and female, and then you also have the total. So we can use this to calculate the number of children within the official age of enrollment for both secondary and primary. So what has to be done now is to turn this into a pivot table, and the first part, this data set, into a pivot table. So the first part of that process is to define this or format these cells as a table. So what you do is you select the whole table containing the data that you want, and then you go to format as table, and then you select any one of these formats. I'm going to select the blue table style, and as you can see, it's going to format that whole area, and then you have to select my table has headers, and then you press OK. So now it's turned it into a table, and then in turn, what you should now do is create a pivot table. So you select a cell anywhere in the table, and then you go to Insert, Pivot Table, and now this is a little different than in the other examples of developing a pivot table, is that you want to put it in an existing worksheet, and why that is will become apparent later. So you select Existing Worksheet, and then it's going to ask you where the location is, and to do that the easiest way is you click on this icon here, which will minimize the dialog box, and then what you want to do is you want to navigate to where you want to an existing worksheet where you want to insert the pivot table. And to be able to do the calculation easily, we're going to put the pivot table in the same place where we have the information on student records. So as you can see, I am now in the worksheet where we have a pivot table that has to do with student records, and I'm going to select a cell anywhere here so that it will insert the age pivot table here. So you can see it's going to insert the age distribution pivot table in here, and you can tell that by this icon here. So, or sorry, you can see where it's going to put the pivot table, and then then you press the icon again, and then what you do is you press OK, and now you have another pivot table in this worksheet. So there's now two pivot tables, one containing student records, another one containing age distribution in the population. So to summarize, we have now calculated the gross enrollment rate from OpenEMIS data for the primary level and the secondary level. Now, as everybody knows, OpenEMIS only contains public school information. And every year, the ministry distributes a questionnaire where private schools are asked to provide status and enrollment information. So what's missing in this gross enrollment calculation are private school gross enrollment rates. And once we get that, we can also calculate a gross enrollment rate for the education sector-wide, combining status information and gross enrollment information for both private and public schools. So before getting down to the nitty-gritty of calculating gross enrollment for private schools, it would be helpful to compare how status of students are reported to the ministry by private schools versus how status of students are kept in Open EMIS. So on this side, on the left-hand side, you will see the data cube downloaded from Open EMIS. And you can see that each row represents an actual person, an individual. So in Open EMIS, information is kept at the individual level. Now on the right-hand side, this is a sheet for that was sent to Brick Academy for the year 2017-2018. And as you can see, instead of being asked to report status information by individual, the school is asked to report in summary form, in aggregate. So for every grade, the school is asked to specify the number of new entrants, those repeating a grade, and total, and also dividing up the number by male and female for the school year. So essentially, we have a problem because we have an apples and oranges problem, essentially, because the private school is asked to report in an aggregate way, while in Open EMIS, data is kept at the individual level. Now, this is not so much a problem for calculating gross enrollment, because if you recall, gross enrollment is counted by just counting everybody who's enrolled in a grade and level, regardless of age. So really, what really matters is this set of numbers right here at the bottom. And as you can, the structure of the questionnaire is such that there are several tables corresponding to each grade. So this one is enrollment K1 to K2 for Brick, another tab for grades 1 to 3, another tab for grade 4 to 6, special needs enrollments for K1, K2, for grade 1 to 3, for 4 to 6, and enrollment and a summary enrollment. But for each of these tabs, really, it's always the last two cells, bottom right-hand corner, that has to be added up. So that's the technical goal, is to add up for each of those tabs these two cells that I've highlighted here. So I have created the structure of a table to collect enrollment information from the questionnaires distributed to all of the primary private schools, that sums up all of the enrollment information that you saw for each of the tabs corresponding to the grades. So in order to use the function that summarizes enrollment from each of the questionnaires distributed to the primary private schools, you have to have this particular worksheet open, as well as the worksheet for a particular primary school, such as Brick Academy. So now, what you see in front of you are the two worksheets required to be open in order to use the consolidate function. So on the right hand side is the Brick Academy worksheet questionnaire open, and we are in the tab for enrollment K1 to K2. And to repeat, the only two cells we really need are these two here. Across all of these grades from K1 as you can see, all the way to this worksheet called Summary Set Enrollment. All right, so we're just gonna do the consolidate function. So in order to do the consolidate function, you go to the row corresponding to the private school questionnaire that you are currently analyzing, and you click on the farthest left cell right here. And what you're going to do is use the consolidate data function, and that is going to be in the data tab and over this icon called consolidate. And now you'll have a dialog box open where it's going to ask, well, the first part here is what kind of mathematical or aggregation you want. You can just leave this as sum, because this is what you want to do. You want to sum up these particular corner cells for a number of worksheets. So what you have to do is you have to enter the reference for these two cells and this particular tab. So how you do that is you double click on the name of the tab. So you see now the name of the tab is entered into this reference box. And then the next thing that you do is you click on a cell, and then you select the cell next to it. And to do that, you press the shift key and then click again. And you can see now that the reference to those two cells are entered in the reference text box along with the name of the tab. And then you press add. All right. So this is the tricky bit. Before you add another group of cells, you absolutely have to make sure that you delete the reference that you see right there that's currently selected. So what you do is you press on the delete key. Right. Now the reference section is blank, and you can now navigate to the next tab where the next set of data that you want to sum. So the next set of data that you want to sum is enrollment for grade 1 to 3, this tab. So what you do is you click on the tab, and you can see now that the tab name is entered in reference. And as with before, what you do is you select the two bottom right-hand corner cells. So click on one cell, press down on the shift key, and click on the next cell. You can see that that has been entered in the reference, and then you click on add. And then again, what you do is you press the delete key to clear the reference name. You go to the next tab and you do exactly the same thing. Actually, let's correct that, because it seems that this particular worksheet isn't formatted as the same as the other worksheets, because as you can see, the bottom right hand corner is not the total for the whole table, but only for grade 6 15 years. So we're actually going to have to change this table. So lesson number 1, when distributing a new version of this questionnaire to the private schools, is that all these tables have to be formatted in exactly the same way. So we're just going to have to pause right now and make some changes to this table so that they're compatible with the other tables that are being summed. So, as it turned out, there was more than one table in the Brick Academy questionnaire that was missing this total row. So, took a moment to repair these tables, and we're now completely entered all of the cells from the various tabs that need to be summed in order to get gross enrollment for Brick Academy along all grades, including special needs. So I'm just going to press OK, and you can see the calculation is placed in the appropriate cells in the summary table in the gross enrollment sheet. So I'm going to do this for each and every one of the primary schools. So before describing in greater detail the summary tables for enrollment that you see in front of you, I wanted to mention that if it wasn't obvious, that the data from the OpenEMIS cubes are all in a pivot table format, but these tables over here are not in the pivot table format. They're just ordinary formatted Excel tables. And as you will see, you're able to use values from a pivot table and mix it with an ordinary table value. So for example, if you look at the gross enrollment rate for primary for all schools, you can see that it uses values from the kind of plain vanilla table, as well as the value from a pivot table. So using the consolidate function, we are able to calculate the total enrollment for the primary schools and the secondary schools in the private sector. So these are the summary tables for those. So the first part of the table are total enrollments for primary, and the second part is total enrollments for secondary private sector. And using those numbers, one is able to calculate the gross enrollment primary for private and the gross enrollment secondary for private, using the exact same formula, obviously, as how the gross enrollment rates were calculated for the public schools. And then the exact same formula is used to calculate a gross enrollment rate for the sector as a whole, for the education sector as a whole, for the TCI. And it might seem a little bit out of the ordinary or inaccurate to have a gross enrollment rate of over 100%. But this is entirely possible because, just a reminder, that the denominator for gross enrollment rate is restricted to the official age of admission for a specific level. So if there are some students that are outside of that range, then it's entirely possible to have a gross enrollment rate of greater than 100%.